2019, right? So we were looking at it, and when we looked at the marketplace, right, there was no good open source operating system options available. So we decided, to work with a couple of different partners, namely Marvell, Delta Networks, as well as Acton, to go get it built. And as Jason said earlier on, in 2021, we started deploying DENT technology in our Just Walk Out stores. And since then, we have deployed DENT on over 3,500 devices in over 150 stores, ranging from the smaller format Amazon Go stores to, the larger Amazon Fresh, as well as the new Amazon style fashion stores. In addition to all of that, we have also what we call partner stores, right, which are typically deployed in stadiums as well as airports. Okay. And also, besides the traditional networking equipment that these network operating systems go on, we have also been able to deploy DENT OS on IoT devices. So namely, entry-exit gates, and then also a wireless base station, that's used to aggregate data from all the different sensors that's in the store. So why did Amazon choose to create DENT? Initially, it started off as a cost reduction tool. We were looking to see how we can reduce the cost of our networks for all our physical stores. Back then, we were using a paid license, for a Linux NOS. And, we started discussing how we could move to an open source, as a means of reducing costs, right? And then in those discussions, we realized that, there wasn't one that was primarily supporting the, 1 gig enterprise market space. So we went out and, created it with the help of the partners. The other thing that we also discovered as we started looking more into it was that there's a security gap, right? Typically, in most software, there will be security exploits, security loopholes that's going to come up over time. And then, oftentimes, with a lot of the paid NOS subscriptions or paid NOS licenses, it takes a while to get those security fixes in place, right? Because you're depending on that particular vendor to go make the fix, qualify the fix, and then roll it out as part of their releases. With an open source system, we can choose to get a patch made and deployed as and when we need it, right? Which was a huge benefit and really important, in the security space. Okay, so DENT today is a reasonably mature operating system. It's been deployed at scale, and these are some of the benefits you can get from using DENT OS that we have seen personally ourselves. Right, it's available on multiple hardware platforms. There is a large automated software test bed that's been implemented by our partners with over 400 test cases. It's stable, as it's been deployed at scale in multiple use cases, all the way from small format kiosks to, larger grocery type stores. And there's, of course, no SDK licensing or software license agreement. And it is a community-driven effort. So retail networking, this is how we have used DENT. So in a typical stores, these are the type of devices that you're going to see at the Amazon store. It's going to range from a couple hundred cameras to thousands of cameras in the larger format stores. And like the rest of the world, right, we have seen an explosion of IoT, at the edge. So what this does is it creates a whole lot of data that needs to be processed. And in the very first stores that we created, we were using AWS, to process a lot of this data, right? The data will be collected at the store, and then it'll be uploaded over to the cloud for processing. And over time, right, as we tried to get more economical in our implementations, we found that, hey, it made more sense to do some pre-processing at the edge of this data and then upload whatever process metadata up to the cloud, to reduce the amount of bandwidth consumption, to reduce the amount of processing that needs to be done at the cloud and then brought back to the store if needed again later on, right? So we have started building edge compute devices, to do a lot of this processing in store within the store itself. And this picture here shows you some of the devices that's connected to the DENT network, right? Starting over all the way on the, let's see, your left, we have the authentication devices, the entry and exit gates, and then the smart sensor shelves, that collects all the activities, that's going on in the store. And then on the right-hand side, we have the more traditional, IT-type devices, with access points, IP cameras, switches, and other type of network appliances like firewalls, right? And all of this runs on top of common platforms, which are our management tools, Linux, and of course the DENT OS. As we built out our management tool sets, one of the things we discovered was that, a lot of these stores have very different configurations. And what we needed to do was ensure that our management tools would scale, across the nuances of all of these different store locations. So as such, what we did was we looked at, open source tools like Netbox, to manage our configurations. And then we also started using some AWS tools like the AWS System Manager, as well as CloudWatch and IoT, together with our own custom developed applications to pull it all together to build something that's scalable, using a CI/CD manner of deployment as well as for development. Okay, and so in addition to what we have done, what we are looking at next is also trying to do the same thing with OS updates and OS deployments. Previously, OS updates would take us anywhere from a couple of weeks to even months, right? And then as we mature our tools, we found that we are able to do this now on a space of, a few weeks or even days in some cases. Common Linux OS kernel is what we use as a standard for our development as well as for deployment of agents on all of these devices. Having a common platform makes it really easy to move from development to deployment, right? And DENT OS helps us facilitate that by being a base OS for both the switches as well as the IoT devices, that are used in the Just Walkout technology. And this picture here shows you some of the DENT platforms that we are currently using in the stores, right? We have a 10 gig switch built by one of our partners, Acton. And then we have 1 gig PoE as well as non-PoE switch. And also another custom form factor, which is a 24-port 1 gig PoE++ switch, right? And as well as a couple of IoT sensor aggregators. And on the software side of things, right, these are some of the features that we are using, in our implementations of our network in the store. And all of these features are available as part of DENT OS. They've been released, over the course of DENT OS version 1 and version 2, right, which we'll call Arthur and Beaverbrox. And these list here is a list of other DENT platforms that are available. They're not necessarily stuff that we're using in our stores today, but our partners have developed them. They have all been tested and qualified, as part of the test bed. And this list is also available on the dent.dev website. Deployment challenges. So just to share with you some of the challenges that we had, during deployment. The first was interoperability, because we built a lot of our own IoT devices, right? The first time plugging them into the switches and APs, was always a challenge, because we run into, timing problems, synchronization problems, in terms of the setup and configuration of all of these devices. So these were things that, we had to deal with and, debug. And the other big challenge that we had was IP tables and TC. In the typical PC server world, IP tables are what we use to manage some of the rules, right? And ACLs and so on. Whereas on the networking side of things, most of the ASIC vendors only supported TC and not IP tables. So we had to migrate what we were doing in IP tables over to TC. For those of you who are familiar with it, it's kind of like, moving from programming in C to programming in assembly to some extent, right? So the good news for everyone here is that, we have already done the work, and that work, we are going to make available as part of DENT, in DENT version 3, right? We'll be making what we call TC Flower, part of the open source contribution that we are making to DENT. Okay, and then finally, what next? So there are a couple of things that we are looking at moving forward. The first is new hardware platforms, right? As things mature, as we learn more about the market and our needs, we found a need to have, new platforms that are more cost-effective, that are easier to deploy, right? So over the next, year or two, we'll be working with our partners to introduce more hardware platforms into DENT. And then in addition, we are also talking to other potential DENT users about other enterprise use cases, right? Besides just retail. Where else can we apply DENT? What are other people interested in using DENT for, right? So, there are folks in other types of retail use cases besides just the stores, that are. And in addition, the other feedback that we also got from other potential users is that they are interested in using an open source control plane along with the operating system, which is primarily the data plane. So together with some of our partners, we are also exploring options in this area, to see, hey, how do we bring in existing third-party open source solutions, or do we need to create our own, right, and contribute it back to DENT? And then the last thing that Amazon is looking at, in the next year or two for DENT is, we want to extend the use of DENT OS to more IoT devices internally. Beyond what we've already done, we're looking at possibly things like, cameras or other compute devices that we're going to use in the store, right? So in summary, right, so hopefully I've shared enough information to convince you that, DENT is, deployed at scale today, right? We are using it in, over 150 stores. And, Amazon is looking to try, grow the DENT community, both in terms of the deployed platforms as well as partners. Okay, and with that, I think we have time for questions. Yes.
I know you're talking about at the edge doing some sort
Okay, not all of that processing happens within DENT itself, right? Some of it happens outside of DENT, right? In on-device compute, as well as some other external devices, like for example, a compute appliance, that could be running DENT. Sure.
So you mentioned about integrating an open source control-based solution. Can you double down on that? Is that like a routing stack or a management?
Okay, so the question was about open source control plane as to whether it is a routing stack or
Routing stack or more for management?
not for management. I think it'll be a little bit of both, right? Because DentOS today doesn't have routing included in it. Right? Routing is part of the Linux kernel, right? So, and today I believe we're using, is it FRR? Yeah.